Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarini Teen Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. I am here with a somewhat late VR to a tag created by Sylvie over at Tarot Magpie, whose original video I will link in the description box below. And this is TaromanceTropes. This is not a tag when I initially saw it that I thought that I would do. I think Sylvie put something in her video description like this is for the romance readers, and I'm more like the book reviewer who mentions that the book would have been better if the romance wasn't there. So not my genre, we'll say, but I do like the prompts, and so I had pasted it into my YouTube planning document, and over time, it turns out that I do have a deck that fits all of these prompts, so here we are. I have chosen all tarot decks since tarot is in the title of the tag, with the exception of one where I think the prompts, it makes sense. You'll see when I get there. I will timestamp below the different prompts and my answers to them. So there are 11 prompts. Without further ado, the first one is enemies to lovers. A deck, style, or system you've insisted just wasn't for you until you realized it was. That would be Tarot of the Cat people. I don't know if I insisted in any outward way that this wasn't for me, but I definitely had firmly decided that it wasn't, because I assumed, without ever looking at this deck, that cat people meant people with cat heads on human bodies, which is one of those things that is an automatic fuck no for me in a deck. It is something that I really am not into. Animal heads on human bodies, or just like other things where a human head would be expected to be, is really something that I don't like. So I, heard Tarot of the Cat people, thought, hell no, and never even really bothered to look at the deck. And it turns out that I was wrong. I found this deck in a shop while I was on vacation, actually. And I picked it up. And I quickly found that it was for me, and now I've got the associated novels sitting on my e-reader waiting for me. I did a group read of the guidebook. This deck is a science fictional or fantasy themed deck. It has a whole kind of set of mythologies that outline the different suits and the different peoples and their different cultures and things like this. This is actually so up my alley that it would be hard for me to think of another deck that is more obviously full of things that I love. So very much an enemies to lovers deck for me, Tarot of the Cat people. And it came with some totally blank cards. I'm not really sure what the point of that is, but there you go. So the next prompt is Friends to Lovers. A deck you used to like well enough, and then one reading deepened or changed your relationship with it. I will say that this is not something that tends to happen for me. I tend to have a fairly good sense of what I'm going to bond closely with and what I'm not before I ever get it in my hands. But in a way, one of my favorite decks fits this prompt, and that is Naturescapes. So this is not a deck that I would say, that a single reading changed my sense of, but getting this deck in my hands, as opposed to just looking at it online, and then working with it specifically while I was locked down during kind of peak pandemic time, a time when locally like park benches were closed. You weren't supposed to stay outside anywhere. And I felt so stuck in my house. I was working from home on Zoom, minimizing trips to public places. I felt so trapped and so disconnected from any kind of nature that was beyond my immediate backyard. This deck was such a support. I didn't know how much I needed this until I had it. I had many a cry with this deck, admittedly. I think that this is one that getting it when I did really impacted my relationship with this deck. I wonder if I had received it at a different time, if I would have bonded with it quite as closely as I did. This is a very special deck to me. So I'll use that for friends to lovers. The next tag, we're still on the same tag. The next prompt is forced proximity, a deck you used for a month, took on holiday, made yourself work with, etc., that changed your relationship with it. So one that you really kind of dedicated yourself to for a particular amount of time. And the deck that stood out for me with regards to that prompt is the Heart and Hands Tarot. This is a deck that I've had for a really long time. I know this is mass market now. This is a trimmed indie copy, which I understand is very similar to or identical to the mass market. This was one of the first forays for me into a deck that wasn't Pamela Coleman Smith's artwork and that wasn't, a near direct clone, other than the very first deck I owned as a very young person. This was my first attempt to kind of stretch beyond the confines of very, very traditional imagery. And as a result, I felt like I needed to spend a ton of time kind of studying. So I journaled about every single card. I wrote down interpretations of different components of the symbolism in each card. I, did practice readings, all kinds of things, because I wanted to really kind of consider my process in reading decks other than the deck that, the books I was learning from and so on were based on, right? So I worked with this one in a really dedicated way for an extended period of time. I have tons of notes on this deck. And that has made it a deck that is very close to my heart and one that I will always have in my collection. And this one I water damaged it. I left it on a windowsill and it got wet, which is why I trimmed it. So now I have a backup copy of this that's the untrimmed one that I bought in a panic. Not sure if I could salvage this one, but since salvaging this one, this is the copy that I always use, my original soggy, not very well trimmed one, so I'll probably rehome the backup, but I really, really like this deck a lot. So that one I had a bit of a forced proximity experience with. The next prompt is Soulmates, when it was just meant to be a deck that you fell in love with immediately. That one, I chose the Great Lakes Tarot by David Wilson. And this one, just meant to be. I've lived, on or around the Great Lakes for my entire life, with the exclusion of a few months here and there. So this is, nature that's very familiar to me, scenery that's very familiar to me, species that are very familiar to me. And this deck wasn't on my radar. I feel like it kind of came out right around one of my many departures from social media. So I didn't see this deck. And then I was given it as a wonderful gift that I am so grateful for. And immediately was in love. I was so happy, and I'm using this right now. I use this a lot in the summer. The colors feel summery, but also just because I'm outside so much more when the weather is warmer, albeit not as warm as this. I'm under the heat dome as we speak with no air conditioning, so I'm inside right now. But this is just so well done. I plan to do a deep dive with this deck, like a video deep dive. I also plan to make my own guidebook. I love working with this deck. This deck is very special. This is 100% a soulmate deck for me. The Great Lakes Tarot. The next prompt is Slow Burn. A deck you didn't have the best first impression of, but the more you worked with it, the more you liked it. So this I may be going slightly adjacent to the prompt with, because I'm thinking about first impression in terms of kind of when I first saw the deck, which was online, as opposed to when I first got it. But the deck that immediately jumped out to me is the Luminous Void Tarot by Laura Zaspan. This deck I saw on other people's channels, and I can't even remember whose channels, right? Like, I saw it around. And my initial impressions of this deck were, wow, that deck is ugly. I really didn't like it. I didn't get it. I thought it was weird. You know, I always liked this one, but I thought that the people were weird. I didn't think that this would be a deck that I would ever want. Looking at it online, it caught my attention because of the shape. I do like an unusual shape, and I do like a shape that is longer and taller as a tarot deck. I also really like matte gilding. So like there were definitely features of this that were appealing, but overall, this artwork, my immediate reaction to this was not positive. I was really not into it. And then I went to a shop, wonderful Hermit's Lamp in Toronto. If you're ever in Toronto, go to the Hermit's Lamp. It's great. And he had copies of the indie decks that he was selling at the time that were open, so you could see the deck, and handle it and shuffle it and check out the cardstock and that before buying. At least for the indie ones he did. And this was one of them. And my impression immediately changed. As soon as I had this in my hands, I got it. Like, I got it in the sense of I understood it. And then not long after, I got it in the sense of purchasing it, because I bought it that day at Hermit's Lamp with much excitement and enthusiasm. And the year that I did, it became like a go-to deck for that entire spring. I really like this. I really like using this deck. It reads wonderfully. And there's something so charming about it that did not come across in videos or photos at all, but in person really appeals to me. So, I don't know if it's so much a slow burn, which is the prompt, as it is a quick 180, but this is the one that I feel like I changed my impression of really dramatically in the way that the prompt is asking about. Okay. The next prompt, if I can get the deck back in the box, there we go. The next prompt is Opposites Attract. This deck is not your usual style, but you love it anyway. This one I also knew immediately what I would pick, and it's one that I've shown before. That is Afro Tarot 2 by Jessie Jumanji, now creating under Jessie Ujazi. This deck is gorgeous. I have this out because I had this Hermit in my top Tarot Trumps Hermit. This judgment will be in my top judgment. There's a spoiler for you. This deck is not my usual style because I don't usually love photographic collage. I know some folks are really, really into it, and some of the photo collage decks are really, really popular. It is not my go-to. I love a photographic landscape deck, like a photographic deck in general, but the photographic decks I tend to be attracted to are decks like Naturescapes, or Kim from Abundant Life Tarot's One with the Earth. Decks where the images don't feel really at all modified. Like they're photos of nature, right? Photos of animals, photos of plants, etc. So this is really outside of the kind of art medium that I would normally choose. But I just think that the creator is really good at it. There's a lot of thought in terms of the light and shadow, you know, and the directions the figures are facing and the light off of items in the background. The guidebook is really good and very detailed in terms of the cultural context of different artifacts and garments and things like that that are included in this deck. And it reads just really well as a Smith-Waite system kind of deck. And it's beautiful. Like, look at that. Like, look how beautiful. It's a gorgeous deck. And it has not really changed my mind on photographic collage. Like, photographic collage is still not a thing that I would say that I'm really into, but I really, really like this one. And so that's why that is my Opposites Attract deck, Afro Tarot 2. And I don't have the first one, but I kind of wish I did. I like that one too. The next prompt is blind date. An impulse buy, a gift, or a deck that you got without much research but ended up really loving. The single most impulsive purchase I have ever made in my life for a tarot deck, and it wasn't a cheap one. Tarot of the North Atlantic. This is a print-on-demand deck, and it is embroidered, and it is, of course, North Atlantic sea life and landscapes themed. I saw this on my friend Corbin of Tail Raven Tarot's channel way back when, and I think I bought it before I was done watching their flip through. I'm Pisces, and water themed decks appeal to me. I'm also somebody who enjoys nature-based decks, animal decks, and I'm also somebody who enjoys the Pips Plus, Pips with Feeling. And this deck has all of those things. And so when I saw this, I didn't really need to see all of the cards to know that it was one that I would like to work with. So, absolutely blind date. And unlike actual blind dates, I'll say in my experience, zero regrets with this one. This was a very good call. I'm very happy to have this. Tarot of the North Atlantic. The next prompt, which is prompt number 8, is Second Chance. A deck you planned to get rid of that worked its way back into rotation, or a deck that you did move along and ended up repurchasing. So I will say I have never moved a deck along and then repurchased it. It has never happened. I tend to be fairly sure and fairly decisive. I also haven't rehomed a ton of decks up until the last year or so. So that's never happened. I do have a deck that is kind of in my rehome pile that I think that could turn into a Second Chance deck, but I'm really not decided on that yet. So that deck is the Literary Tarot. I backed this on Kickstarter with much enthusiasm. I think I backed for damn near all of the extras on this one, actually. The big book. I backed for, extra cards, even though I was mad that in order to get queer representation, I needed to pay for extra cards. That's a rant for another day. I was really excited about this, and there's a lot about it that I like. I think in terms of a collaborative deck with multiple artists, this is one of the most cohesive that I have seen. Some of the art is done by, I think it's like 4 or 5 different artists, and it feels really unified. I think that is done really well. I think the pairings are interesting. I wish there was a bit more range, but I know that they felt constrained by American copyright to some extent. There's a lot of images in this deck that I really like, actually. But I've had some shuffling issues. with this one. It's very thick, which is not, I'm not anti a thick deck. I've been trying to shuffle it to make it stop clumping. It's a little bit clumpy in a way that impedes me from using it. I also don't know all of the literary references, and sometimes that's a bit of a barrier. And in terms of my current reading, like, interests, classics are just not really where it's at for me right now. So, you know, I'm not sure. It is a beautiful deck. It is a beautiful deck. I'm not quite sure. I'm definitely keeping the big book because the big book I quite like. But the deck I'm really not sure of. This may end up being a rehome. But it's the one that's in my rehome pile right now that I'm maybe the least sure of that decision. So it may come out. We'll see. The next prompt is Unrequited Love. You really want to love this deck, but it just doesn't love you back yet, question mark. So this one, I struggle with this one. I struggle with this one so much. Unrequited Love, Hollow Valley Tarot. This is another one that I backed on Kickstarter. It is by Aaron Elise and Davis Carr. And this deck doesn't love me back yet. There's so much about this that I love. I love the backs. Look at how nice those are. I love the backs. It is definitely in the Pips Plus category of deck that I am enthusiastic about. I like a monochromatic deck. I like a black and white deck. I like the overall vibe of this. I like the font even. Yeah, there's a ton that I like about this. And I wonder if maybe incorporating this into studying astrology, if I ever do kind of want to look at astrology correspondences in tarot, might be something to bond with this deck, because it does have the astrological glyphs written on the cards. I think that a barrier for me with this deck is ultimately that the guidebook doesn't actually do what I want it to do. The guidebook does tell you, for example, which herbs are on the card, but it doesn't say, you know, this herb is on the Page of Swords because this herb is associated with X, Y, and Z, and that relates to the Page of Swords. And that's the level of information that I want. You know, I feel like those associations are obviously abundantly clear to the creators, but they're not to me. And it's particularly with reference to the plants, which there are a lot of in this deck. So I feel like there's a little bit of almost a learning curve with this, that I need to decide to either just, you know, say forget about that and read it as a pip deck and leave it at that, or spend more time with. And I'm not sure which of those it will be, or if it will be a gift along, pass along, rehome kind of situation, because it is a beautiful deck. It is a beautiful deck, and I want to love it. But so far that love is unrequited from the Hollow Valley Tarot. Prompt number 10 is Love Triangle. 2 decks that are in competition with each other in your collection, or a pair of decks that you always use together. Thank you, Sylvie, for providing options. Love should not be in competition. Love should not be in competition. It should only multiply, right? So that's also potentially a conversation for another day. We'll see. Love Triangle. 2 decks that you always use together. I don't know that I can say always about this, but I do have a pair that I came up with, and this is the only Oracle deck I'm including because I don't pair tarot with other tarot. I very frequently use the Tarot of Trees by Dana O'Driscoll with the Wandering Woods Oracle by Jessica Lee. And the reason that these two go together for me is because these are decks that I take camping. They're both good for camping. So they might not be visually an obvious pair, but thematically, certainly I think it's pretty obvious. I like the Tarot of Trees for camping because it's small. it fits in even the smallest bag that I might be taking. And the glossy cardstock, which is really not my favorite, but is not bad on this deck, actually. It's very shuffleable. The glossy cardstock makes it a little bit wipeable. So if I get, you know, a dirt smudge on there because I'm reading, you know, on the ground on a cloth and one flies away, or if I'm on a picnic table or, you know, something like that while I'm camping, then this is a really good one to have with me. And I really like this deck. There's one card that I don't love, but other than that one card, I really love this deck. I think it's really effective. I love the colors. I'm a big fan of Dana O'Driscoll and her work as well. So the Tarot of Trees goes for me with the Whispering Woods, and this is just a one with nice messages on it. All of the frames are the same. All of the backs are the same. And this is just a nice, you know, I'll take this to the park and pick something and sit with it for a while. This is just a nice supportive deck. So when I'm outside, particularly camping, space is at a premium. When I'm packing, if I'm packing everything that I need, you know, if I need to carry all my food and my water and all that kind of stuff, then these decks are a pair that is perfect for that. Finally, deck number 11 is Illicit Lover. Can't help but be tempted to go back again and again. And that one, for me lately, could only be one deck. And that is the Fyodor Pavlov. This is so beautiful. I kick myself for missing the indie version of this, but I'm so glad that the mass market one feels so well done to me. This deck is just gorgeous. It feels luxurious to work with. It brings me joy to work with. It's easy to read. It's very Smith-Waite. It's kind of stylish in its own way. I like the use of a limited color palette. I like so much about this. And so when I've been looking for a Smith-Waite system deck to work with, this one just keeps making its way onto my table. I took a tarot class not long ago, and I wanted to work with one Marseille and one Smith-Waite for the activities throughout that class, and this was a Smith-Waite deck that I chose, so I used it for that. And it's one that I used for my card of the year reading, so it's one that I revisit a fair amount. It's just a beautiful deck. I think it looks good with a lot of Oracle decks. Like, the color palette is kind of amenable to a lot of the Oracle decks in my collection. So I'm just really into this deck. And, you know, I'm not going to say it's illicit, but, you know, lovers definitely the Fyodor Pavlov tarot. So that is my VR to Sylvie with TaromanceTropes. I've been really enjoying the VRs to this one. If you have any of these particular decks or want to share with me what you might choose for any of these prompts, feel free to do so in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.